The contract was already signed when I walked into the conference room. My life's work, 3 years of 18-hour days, sleepless nights debugging code, and dreams bigger than my tiny apartment, was being sold for a fraction of what it was worth. My own mother slid the papers across the mahogany table like she was doing me a favor. "It's for Tyler," she said, not even looking at me. "Family comes first, Maya. You'll understand when you're older." I was 26 years old, and I'd just built a company worth $2 million. But apparently, I was still too young to understand why my brother's gambling debts were now my responsibility. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning and from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya Chen, and I need you to understand something from the start. I wasn't born into privilege. I wasn't handed opportunities on a silver platter. Everything I built, I earned through code written at 3 a.m, through rejections. From 47 investors before finding the 48th who believed in my vision. Through eating ramen for 6 months straight because every dollar went back into my company. TechFlow wasn't just a startup to me. It was proof that a girl from Denver who learned programming from YouTube tutorials could build something that mattered. We created software that helped small businesses automate their inventory management, and we were good at it. Really good. By year 2, we had 800 clients across 12 states. By year 3, we were processing over 50,000 transactions monthly, and venture capitalists were finally returning my calls. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. I was in our small office space in downtown Denver, reviewing user analytics with my 2 employees when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. She never called during business hours, so I stepped outside to take it. "Maya, we need to talk. Can you come home tonight?" Her voice sounded strained, tired in a way that made my stomach clench. "Is everything okay? Is Dad all right?" "Just come home, 7 o'clock. And Maya, bring any important business documents you have." The line went dead, and I stared at my phone, confusion mixing with dread. Important business documents? My parents had never shown interest in TechFlow beyond polite questions at family dinners. Dad would nod when I explained our latest features, and Mom would change the subject to ask when I was going to find a nice boy and settle down. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have called back and demanded answers. Instead, I spent the rest of the day distracted, my mind cycling through possibilities. Maybe they wanted to invest. Maybe Dad was finally ready to retire from his accounting firm and wanted to understand my business better. Maybe Tyler had finally gotten his life together and they wanted to celebrate as a family. Tyler, my older brother by 3 years, who'd always been the golden child despite his string of failed ventures and questionable choices. While I was building something real, Tyler was bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes and weekend trips to the casinos in Black Hawk. But he had charm, the kind that made our parents overlook his flaws and focus on his potential. I arrived at the family home in Lakewood at exactly 7 o'clock, manila folder of financial documents tucked under my arm. The house looked the same as always, red brick ranch style with Mom's carefully tended rose garden, but something felt different. There were too many cars in the driveway. Tyler's beat-up Honda, but also a sleek black BMW I didn't recognize. Inside, the living room was crowded with people I'd never seen before. 2 men in expensive suits sat on our old couch, looking completely out of place next to Mom's collection of ceramic cats. Tyler was there too, pacing by the window with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, avoiding eye contact. "Maya, sit down," Dad said, his voice unusually formal. He looked older than I remembered, gray stubble and tired eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "What's going on?" I remained standing, clutching my folder tighter. One of the suited men cleared his throat. "Ms. Chen, I'm David Morrison from Morrison Legal Services. We represent several creditors who have extended significant loans to your brother Tyler." My blood turned cold. "Loans?" "Maya," Mom interrupted, her voice sharp with the tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. Tyler made some poor decisions. He owes a lot of money, and these people need to be paid back. How much money? The silence stretched. Too long. Tyler finally spoke from his corner, voice barely above a whisper. 350,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, bumping into the wall. $350,000? Tyler, what did you do? It started small, he said, still not looking at me. Just some sports betting, then some poker games with friends. But I had a system, Maya. I was going to win it all back and more. I just needed a bigger stake. So you borrowed money from loan sharks? Not loan sharks, the second suit interrupted smoothly. Legitimate lending institutions with proper documentation and reasonable interest rates. Reasonable. The word felt like poison in my mouth. Nothing about this felt reasonable. The thing is, Morrison continued, your brother listed his family as co-signers and potential assets for collateral purposes. I never signed anything, I said quickly. No, but your business was listed as a family asset available for debt recovery. The room started spinning. That's not how business ownership works. You can't just claim someone else's company as collateral. Dad finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my knees weak. Guilt, resignation, and something else that looked almost like relief. Maya, honey, Mom said, her voice taking on that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. We know how hard you've worked on your little computer business, but Tyler is family. He's your brother. And family takes care of family. My little computer business? The words came out strangled. Mom, TechFlow generated over $800,000 in revenue last year. We have paying customers, employees, investors interested in our next round of funding. That's wonderful. Dear, she said dismissively. But money isn't everything. Tyler could go to prison. Or worse. These men have been very patient, but their patience has limits. Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. We've had your company evaluated by a third-party assessor. Based on current assets, client base, and projected earnings, we're prepared to accept a sale price of $400,000 to settle your brother's debt completely. $400,000 for a company worth at least $2 million, probably more. I looked around the room desperately, searching for someone who would understand how insane this was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Tyler was staring at the floor, Dad was examining his hands, and Mom was looking at me with expectation, like I was being unreasonable for not immediately agreeing. I need time to think about this, I said. Unfortunately, time is a luxury we don't have, Morrison replied. Mr. Chen's creditors have been extremely generous with extensions, but they require resolution by the end of this week. This week? That's impossible. You can't just demand someone sell their business in 5 days. Mom stood up and walked over to me, placing her hands on my shoulders with that patronizing smile I remembered from childhood arguments. Maya, sweetie, you're being dramatic. It's just a business. You can start another one. But Tyler is your brother, and if something happens to him, we'll never forgive ourselves. Just a business. 3 years of my life reduced to just a business. Besides, she continued, you're still young. You have plenty of time to build. Something else. Tyler is 31. He needs this chance to start over. I looked at Tyler then, really looked at him. He was thin, thinner than I'd seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of a cornered animal. Part of me felt sorry for him. Part of me wanted to help. But the larger part of me, the part that had worked, until my eyes burned and my back ached to build something meaningful, that part was screaming that this was wrong. What happens if I say no? I asked Morrison. His smile was cold and professional. Then we'll be forced to pursue other collection methods. Mr. Chen's debt agreement does include provisions for family asset recovery. And while we prefer cooperative solutions, we have legal options available. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining your options, Ms. Chen. You can sell voluntarily at a fair price, or you can wait for the court system to force a sale at whatever price the market will bear, which rarely works out well for anyone involved. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Mom's antique clock on the mantel. I looked around one more time at the faces of my family, searching for someone who would stand up for me, who would say this was crazy, who would remind everyone that Tyler's mistakes shouldn't become my burden. Nobody said a word. I need to review the paperwork, I said finally. Morrison smiled and slid the contract across the coffee table. Of course. Take all the time you need. We'll wait. I sat down on the edge of Dad's recliner and opened the folder. The language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't understand, but the key points were clear enough. Transfer of all assets of TechFlow Solutions, LLC to Morrison Legal Services for the sum of $400,000, with proceeds going directly to settle Tyler Chen's outstanding debts. My signature line was highlighted in yellow. As I read, I became aware of the conversation continuing around me in hushed tones. Mom was explaining to Morrison how responsible I'd always been, how I'd understand that family comes first. Dad was asking technical questions about the transfer process. Tyler was silent, but I could feel him watching me, waiting. Nobody asked how I felt about losing everything I'd built. Nobody asked if I had other options or if I wanted to explore alternatives. They'd already decided that my company was the solution to Tyler's problem, and they were just waiting for me to accept it. The worst part wasn't the money, though losing hundreds of thousands of dollars made me physically sick. The worst part was the realization that to my own family, 3 years of my life, my dreams, my success, were all just convenient resources to bail Tyler out of his latest mess. I thought about my employees, Sarah and Marcus, who'd left stable jobs to join me because they believed in what we were building. I thought about our clients, small business owners who trusted us with their most important data. I thought about the investor meetings I had scheduled for next month, the expansion plans we'd been developing, the new features that would revolutionize how our software worked. All of it was about to disappear because Tyler couldn't stay away from poker tables. Maya? Mom's voice cut through my thoughts. We really do need an answer tonight. I looked up from the contract to find everyone staring at me. Morrison had his pen ready. Tyler was finally making eye contact. And what? I saw there wasn't gratitude or apology. It was expectation. Like I owed him this. Like my success was somehow always meant to be his safety net. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. But a cold, calculating awareness that this wasn't about family loyalty or helping my brother. This was about my family sacrificing my future to clean up Tyler's past, and they expected me to smile and go along with it. I signed the contract. But as I wrote my name on that yellow highlighted line, I made myself a promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tyler might have my company tonight, but he had no idea what he'd actually taken from me. And more importantly, he had no idea what I was capable of when someone pushed me too far. I handed the signed papers back to Morrison with a steady hand. There, I said quietly. It's done. Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes. You're such a good sister, Maya. Tyler is so lucky to have you. I didn't hug her back. I was too busy, memorizing every face in that room, every word that had been said, every detail of how they'd all conspired to steal my life's work. Because quiet as I kept it that night, I was already planning how to get it all back. And they had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up in my studio apartment feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. For a moment, I forgot what had happened. Then reality crashed back, and I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. My company was gone. 3 years of work, erased in a single evening because my family decided Tyler's mistakes were my responsibility. I called in sick to my own company, which felt surreal since technically it wasn't mine anymore. Sarah answered the phone at TechFlow, her voice bright and cheerful, completely unaware that everything had changed overnight. "Maya, how are you feeling? You sound terrible." "Just a stomach bug," I lied. "Can you handle things today? I'll be back tomorrow." "Of course. Marcus and I were just reviewing the Johnson account expansion. Their order came through this morning, and they want to upgrade to the premium package." Isn't that amazing? Amazing. My former company was still growing, still succeeding, and I was no longer part of it. I hung up before Sarah could hear me crying. I spent that first day in a haze, alternating between fury and disbelief. How had this happened so fast? How had my own parents ambushed me like that? But as the shock wore off, something else took its place. Curiosity. The same analytical mind that had built TechFlow started asking questions. The timeline bothered me most. According to Morrison, Tyler had been accumulating debt for months, maybe years. But I'd seen my brother regularly at family dinners, holiday gatherings, weekend barbecues. He'd seemed fine. Stressed sometimes, but nothing that suggested he was drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. So when had this started? And why hadn't anyone mentioned it until they needed my company to fix it? I opened my laptop and started digging. If there's one thing you learn as a tech entrepreneur, it's how to research efficiently. I began with Tyler's social media accounts, scrolling back through months of posts. Most of it was typical Tyler content, photos of craft beer, hiking trips, nights out with friends. But as I went further back, patterns started emerging. 6 months ago, Tyler had posted constantly from a casino in Black Hawk. Not just one trip, but weekly visits. Photos of poker tables, slot machines, him grinning with stacks of chips. The captions were all variations of "luck is turning around" and "big wins coming." But if he was winning consistently, why did he need to borrow money? 8 months back, the post shifted. Less about big wins, more about investment opportunities and new ventures. Tyler had shared articles about cryptocurrency trading, day trading strategies, online poker tutorials. He'd even posted about joining some kind of high-stakes investment club that promised guaranteed returns. 10 months ago, I found what I was looking for. A photo of Tyler at some kind of fancy party, arm around a guy in an expensive suit. The caption read, "Meeting successful entrepreneurs who understand real opportunity. Thanks to David Morrison for the introduction to serious investors." Morrison, the same lawyer who'd been in my parents' living room last night. Tyler had known him for almost a year, which meant this debt situation hadn't been the sudden crisis my parents had portrayed. This had been building for months, and they'd all known about it. I screenshot everything and started a folder on my desktop labeled Research. Then I moved on to public records. Colorado has surprisingly transparent business registration databases. Within an hour, I'd found Morrison Legal Services, incorporated 18 months ago with David Morrison as the sole proprietor. But Morrison Legal wasn't just a law firm. They had subsidiary connections to 3 other businesses: Front Range Investment Group, Colorado Private Lending, and Mountain States Collection Services. This wasn't making sense. Why would a law firm own an investment group and a collection agency? I kept digging. Front Range Investment Group had a website, sleek and professional, advertising exclusive investment opportunities for qualified individuals. Their portfolio included real estate ventures, startup funding, and something called Alternative Lending Solutions. The leadership page showed David Morrison as managing partner, alongside 2 other men I didn't recognize. But here's what caught my attention. Front Range Investment Group's client testimonials included a glowing review from Maya Chen, posted 7 months ago. Thanks to Front Range, I've finally found investment strategies that match my risk tolerance and growth expectations. Highly recommended for anyone serious about building wealth. My brother hadn't just borrowed money from these people. He'd been working with them, promoting them, bringing them other clients. And now they owned my company. I called Tyler's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same result. By evening, I'd called 6 times without an answer. The next day, I drove to TechFlow's office, dreading what I'd find. Morrison had said the sale was effective immediately, but I needed to see for myself what that meant. I also needed to tell Sarah and Marcus what had happened before they heard it from someone else. Our office was in a converted warehouse in the Rhino district, nothing fancy but perfect for a growing tech company. I'd negotiated a 3-year lease and spent months setting up our workspace exactly how I wanted it. Open floor plan, plenty of natural light, a kitchen area where we could brainstorm over coffee. I used my key to get in, half expecting to find the locks changed, but everything looked normal. Sarah was at her desk, working on client communications. Marcus was in the corner, debugging code on his 3-monitor setup. For a moment, I could pretend nothing had changed. "Maya!" Sarah looked up, concerned. "You still look pale. Are you sure you should be here?" I sat down heavily in my desk chair. "We need to talk, both of you." For the next 20 minutes, I explained what had happened. I watched their faces shift from confusion to disbelief to anger. Sarah actually stood up and started pacing. "They can't do that," she said. "You can't just force someone to sell their business for family debt. That's not how any of this works." "They can if the debt holders have legal leverage," Marcus said quietly. He'd been in tech longer than either of us and had seen his share of business disasters. "But Maya, this sounds like predatory lending. Did you read all the fine print on buy? What you signed?" I hadn't. I'd been too shocked, too overwhelmed by my family's betrayal to carefully review every clause in Morrison's contract. "I have copies of everything at home. I'll go through it all tonight." "Good," Marcus said. "Because if they used fraudulent tactics or misrepresented the terms, you might have legal recourse." Sarah was still pacing. "What happens to us? To our jobs?" "I don't know yet. Morrison said they'd honor existing employment contracts, but I don't know what that means for your roles or responsibilities." We spent the rest of the morning in limbo, trying to work normally while processing the fact that our small company was now owned by strangers. Around noon, David Morrison himself walked through our front door. He looked different in daylight, younger than I'd thought, maybe mid-30s with perfectly styled hair and a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no, and meant it. "Good morning, everyone," he said, flashing that same cold smile from the night before. I wanted to stop by and introduce myself properly to the team. Sarah and Marcus looked at me uncertainly. I stood up slowly, trying to project calm authority despite feeling like my world was crumbling. "Mr. Morrison, I wasn't expecting you. So soon. Please call me David. We're all going to be working together now, after all." He looked around the office appraisingly, like he was calculating the value of our equipment. "I have to say, you've built something impressive here, Maya. The client base, the revenue streams, the growth potential. Very impressive indeed." There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. The way he said impressive sounded like he was congratulating himself rather than acknowledging my work. "What exactly are your plans for TechFlow?" I asked. "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through some notes. "We're planning to streamline operations, maximize efficiency, that sort of thing. Nothing dramatic, but there will be some changes." Sarah crossed her arms. "What kind of changes?" Morrison's smile got wider. "Well, for starters, we'll be relocating operations to a more cost-effective facility. This space is expensive, and frankly, unnecessary for the type of work you do. We've identified a perfectly adequate office space in Aurora that will cut overhead by 60%. Aurora, a suburb 45 minutes away in good traffic. Our clients were downtown businesses who appreciated being able to meet with us easily. Our best networking events were in Rhino and Lodo. Moving to Aurora would kill our local connections. Our lease here runs for another 18 months, I said, which we'll be breaking. The penalty is substantial, but still less expensive than maintaining this location. Morrison made another note on his phone. We'll also be transitioning to a more efficient staffing model. Maya, since you're obviously the technical expert, you'll continue in a senior developer role. However, we'll be bringing in our own management team to handle business operations, client relations, and strategic planning. My stomach dropped. You're demoting me. Not demoting, repositioning. You're brilliant at what you do, Maya, but let's be honest, you're not a natural business leader. Tyler mentioned that you've always been more comfortable with computers than people. Tyler, of course he'd been discussing my supposed shortcomings with Morrison. Marcus spoke up for the first time. What about our current projects, our client commitments? All existing contracts will be honored naturally, but we'll be implementing new protocols for client communication and project management. Everything will go through our business development team moving forward. I felt Sarah's eyes on me, waiting for me to fight back, to stand up for our team and our work. But what could I say? Legally, Morrison owned everything now. The computers we worked on, the software we'd built, even the coffee maker in our kitchen. He could do whatever he wanted. When does all this start? I asked. Next week. We'll have the new office ready by Monday, and our management team will begin transitioning in immediately. Morrison checked his watch, an expensive-looking thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I'll need everyone to sign new employment agreements by Friday. Standard terms, competitive salaries, nothing to worry about. He handed me 3 manila envelopes. Maya, yours includes the senior developer compensation package. I think you'll find it quite fair. After he left, the three of us sat in stunned silence. Finally, Sarah spoke. This is insane. He's basically gutting everything you built and turning it into some generic tech company. I opened my envelope and scanned the employment agreement. The salary was actually decent, about what I'd been paying myself as CEO. But the job description made my heart sink. Software Development Specialist, reporting to Business Operations Manager. No client contact, no strategic decisions, no input on company direction. I'd gone from CEO to employee in 48 hours. That evening, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table and started reading every word of the sale contract I'd signed. Marcus was right to suggest I look for fraudulent terms. What I found was worse than fraud. It was completely legal and completely devastating. Buried in Section 12, subsection 4, was a clause I'd missed the first time. Purchaser reserves. The right to modify business operations, staffing, and strategic direction as deemed necessary for optimal performance and debt recovery. Section 15 was even worse. Original owner agrees to a 5-year non-compete agreement preventing the establishment of competing businesses within the software development and business automation sectors. 5 years. They hadn't just bought my company. They'd made sure I couldn't start a new one. I poured myself a large glass of wine and kept reading. By midnight, I'd found 12 different clauses that essentially gave Morrison total control over tech flow while preventing me from doing anything about it. The contract was airtight, written by lawyers who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. But something still bothered me about the timeline. I pulled out my laptop and started researching Morrison Legal Services more thoroughly. Their business registration showed incorporation 18 months ago, but their first major client contract wasn't until 8 months ago, right around the time Tyler started posting about his investment club. I cross-referenced the dates with Tyler's social media activity and found something interesting. The week after Tyler posted that photo with Morrison, he'd shared an article about family business opportunities and leveraging inherited assets for growth. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about Dad's accounting firm. But what if he'd been talking about my company? I spent the next 3 hours building a timeline of every interaction between Tyler and Morrison's businesses. Front Range Investment Group, Colorado Private Lending. The pattern that emerged made me sick. Tyler hadn't accidentally accumulated gambling debt that Morrison was helping to collect. Tyler had been working with Morrison from the beginning, using his family connections to identify opportunities. My company hadn't been a last resort solution to Tyler's problem. It had been the target all along. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in Lakewood. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. Mom was in her garden, deadheading roses with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. She looked up when she heard my car door slam, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been guilt flash across her face. "Maya, honey, how are you holding up?" "I need to ask you some questions, Mom, and I need honest answers." She set down her pruning shears and brushed dirt off her hands. "Of course. Let's go inside." We sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd had countless family dinners, where my parents had explained difficult concepts like divorce and death and disappointment. Now I was the one asking the hard questions. "How long have you known about Tyler's debt?" Mom's hands fidgeted with her coffee mug. "Maya, I already told you, this was all sudden. Tyler came to us last week and explained the situation." "That's not true, Mom. I've done research. Tyler's been working with Morrison's companies for almost a year. So I'll ask again, how long have you known?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Mom sighed deeply. 6 months, she said quietly. "Tyler told us about his situation 6 months ago." 6 months. I let that sink in. "And in all that time, none of you thought to mention it to me?" "We were trying to protect you, Maya. Tyler said he could handle it, that he had a plan." "What plan?" Another long pause. "He said he'd found investors who could help him. People who understood his situation and were willing to work with him." "Morrison." "Yes. Tyler said David was helping him restructure his debt, find alternative solutions." I felt like I was interrogating a witness, pulling information bit by bit from someone who clearly didn't want to tell me the truth. "When did selling my company become one of those alternative solutions?" Mom stood up abruptly and walked to the sink, keeping her back to me. "Tyler didn't want to involve you initially. He really didn't, Maya. But the situation got worse, and David explained that family asset liquidation was sometimes the only viable option for debt resolution." Family asset liquidation. She was using Morrison's language, his clinical terms. That made stealing my company sound like a reasonable business decision. Did it ever occur to any of you to ask me if I wanted to help? To give me a choice in how my own company was used? "Oh, Maya." Mom turned around, and her expression had shifted to that patronizing sympathy I remembered from childhood. "We knew you'd say no. You've always been so stubborn about your business, so protective. We thought it would be easier this way." "Easier? For who?" "Tyler's your brother," she continued. "And family takes care of family. We raised you to understand that. You raised me to work hard and build something meaningful, which I did. And then you gave it away to clean up Tyler's mess." "It's not that simple, Maya." "It's exactly that. Simple." I stood up to leave, but Mom grabbed my arm. "Maya, wait. There's something else you should know." I turned back, dreading whatever was coming next. "Tyler's not just in debt to Morrison's companies. There are other creditors, other people he owes money to. Dangerous people." "What kind of dangerous people?" I don't know all the details, but Tyler said that if he couldn't pay everyone back, there might be consequences. For all of us. Are you telling me this whole thing was about protecting the family from Tyler's other debts? I'm telling you that your brother was scared, Maya. Really scared. And we were scared for him. I stared at my mother, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything else I'd learned. If Tyler owed money to dangerous people, that added a layer of complexity I hadn't considered, but it still didn't explain why my company had to be the solution. How much does he owe these other people? I don't know exactly. Tyler was vague about the details. Of course he was. Tyler had probably told my parents just enough to scare them into supporting his plan, without giving them enough information to ask intelligent questions. I left my parents' house with more questions than answers, but also with a growing certainty that I'd been manipulated by experts. Morrison and Tyler had played my family perfectly, using fear and family loyalty to engineer the outcome they wanted. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I was the same person who'd walked into that living room 2 nights ago. The naive entrepreneur who trusted family and believed in fairness, that person was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that if they wanted to play games with my life, I'd learn their rules and beat them at it. I had 5 years before the non-compete expired. 5 years to plan, to learn, to gather the resources I'd need for what I was already starting to think of as my comeback. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd taken everything I cared about and left me powerless. They had no idea what they'd actually done was set me free. 3 months after losing TechFlow, I was working in Morrison's sterile Aurora office, watching my life's work get systematically destroyed. The new management team had fired Sarah for asking too many questions about client retention rates. Marcus had quit after they tried to make him rewrite our core software to include tracking features that violated user privacy agreements. I was alone, sitting in a gray cubicle, debugging code for a system I no longer recognized. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built something beautiful and functional, and they'd turned it into exactly the kind of corporate bloatware I'd spent years trying to avoid. Client complaints were pouring in daily. Our signature feature, the intuitive interface that made inventory management simple for small business owners, had been replaced with a complicated dashboard that required training courses to operate. But I wasn't just watching TechFlow die. I was documenting everything. Every policy change, every client complaint, every conversation with the new management team. I'd learned patience in those 3 months, the kind of patience that comes from having a longer-term plan. My breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon in June. I was reviewing error logs when I noticed something odd in the system architecture. The new tracking features Morrison's team had implemented weren't just collecting user data for analytics. They were harvesting business financial information, inventory values, and client lists, then transmitting that data to external servers. I spent my lunch break digging deeper into the code. What I found made my hands shake. TechFlow wasn't just spying on our clients' businesses. It was systematically gathering intelligence that could be used to evaluate which companies might be vulnerable to acquisition or debt-based takeovers. Morrison hadn't bought my company to collect Tyler's debt. He'd bought it to turn it into a tool for identifying and targeting other small businesses. I copied everything onto an encrypted drive and went home early, claiming I felt sick. Which wasn't entirely a lie. I felt sick to my stomach knowing that my software was being used to prey on the exact people I'd created it to help. That evening, I called Jessica Rodriguez, a journalist I'd met at a tech meetup 2 years earlier. Jessica wrote investigative pieces for the Denver Business Journal, specializing in predatory lending and small business fraud. If anyone would understand the implications of what I'd discovered, it would be her. We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, far from Aurora and far from anyone who might recognize me. Jessica was sharp, mid-30s with the kind of focused intensity that made sources want to tell her everything. I'd always admired her work, but I'd never imagined I'd need her help. "Maya," she said, settling into the booth across from me. "You sounded stressed on the phone. What's going on?" I pulled out my laptop and showed her everything. The original sale contract, Tyler's timeline with Morrison, the code modifications, the data harvesting operations. I walked her through how Morrison had orchestrated the whole thing, using my brother's gambling problem as leverage to acquire a functional business intelligence tool. Jessica's expression grew darker as I explained each piece. When I finished, she sat back and whistled softly. "This is bigger than just your company, Maya. If they're using TechFlow to identify vulnerable businesses, they're probably running this scam on multiple targets." "That's what I was afraid of." "Have you gone to the police?" "With what?" "Everything Morrison did was technically legal. I signed the contract voluntarily. Tyler really did owe the money. The only potentially illegal activity is the data harvesting, and even that's in a gray area because of the terms of service our clients agreed to." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "But if we can prove a pattern of predatory behavior, if we can show that Morrison is systematically targeting small businesses using fraudulent debt collection as a cover, that's a different story." "How do we prove that?" "We find other victims. We document the pattern, and we figure out who's really behind Morrison Legal Services." That last comment caught my attention. "What do you mean, who's really behind it?" Jessica pulled out her own laptop and opened a file I could see was labeled Morrison Investigation. She'd already been looking into him. "I've been tracking Morrison's activities for 6 months, ever since a small restaurant owner contacted me about losing his business to what he called a debt collection scam. Morrison Legal forced him to sell after his son accumulated gambling debts." "Sound familiar?" My blood went cold. "How many others?" "At least 5 that I've confirmed, all small, successful businesses, all forced sales due to family member debt, all purchased at well below market value." Jessica scrolled through her notes. "But here's what's interesting. Morrison Legal Services is owned by something called Rocky Mountain Holdings, LLC, which is owned by Summit Capital Partners, which is owned by Apex Investment Group. Shell companies." "Exactly. And at the end of that chain, I found something very interesting." Jessica turned her laptop toward me. "Apex Investment Group is owned 51% by a man named Vincent Castellano." The name meant nothing to me, but Jessica's expression suggested it should. "Castellano runs what the FBI considers the most sophisticated white-collar crime operation in Colorado. Officially, he's a legitimate businessman, with interests in real estate, hospitality, and financial services. Unofficially, he specializes in acquiring assets through legal but unethical means. Loan sharking? More sophisticated than that. Castellano's operation identifies successful small businesses, then creates situations where the owners are forced to sell. Sometimes it's manufactured debt, sometimes it's regulatory pressure, sometimes it's family emergencies. But the result is always the same. Successful businesses get acquired for a fraction of their value." I stared at Jessica's screen, processing the implications. "So Tyler's gambling debt wasn't just bad luck. It was orchestrated." "I think so. And I think your brother might have been working with them from the beginning." We spent the next 2 hours going through Jessica's research. The pattern was clear and sickening. Castellano's organization would identify promising small businesses, then find ways to create leverage over the owners. In some cases, they'd encourage family members to accumulate debt with their lending operations. In others, they'd manufacture regulatory violations or tax problems. But the end result was always the same: forced sale at below-market prices. My company hadn't been unlucky. We'd been targeted. "There's something else you should know," Jessica said as we prepared to leave. "Vincent Castellano doesn't just acquire businesses to resell them. He integrates them into his operation. TechFlow isn't being destroyed randomly. It's being retooled for a specific purpose. What purpose? Intelligence gathering. If they can use your software to monitor the financial health of hundreds of small businesses, they can identify the best targets for future acquisitions. I drove home that night with a strange mixture of rage and relief. Rage because the scope of the manipulation was so much larger than I'd imagined. Relief because I finally understood what I was really fighting. This wasn't about Tyler's gambling problem or family dysfunction. This was about organized crime, and I had stumbled into the middle of a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. But I'd also stumbled into something else. Evidence. Real documented evidence of a criminal conspiracy. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the FBI field office in downtown Denver. I'd never been inside a federal building before, and the security screening process was intimidating. But I'd made my decision. If Morrison and Castellano wanted to play games with the law, I'd use the law against them. Special Agent Lisa Park was a compact woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of quiet authority that comes from 20 years of federal law enforcement. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. Ms. Chen, what you're describing aligns with an ongoing investigation into Vincent Castellano's business practices. But I need you to understand that building a federal case takes time. Months, possibly years. I understand. I also need you to understand that if you're right about Castellano's involvement, these people are dangerous. They don't typically use violence, but they have been known to retaliate against people who threaten their operations. What kind of retaliation? Financial harassment, legal challenges. Sometimes they target family members. Agent Park set down her pen and looked at me directly. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about Sarah, who'd lost her job for asking questions. I thought about Marcus, who'd quit rather than compromise his principles. I thought about all the small business owners whose companies had been stolen through manufactured debt and legal manipulation. I'm sure. Agent Park nodded. Then we'll need everything you have. Documentation, communications, code samples, financial records. Everything. What about Jessica Rodriguez? She's been investigating this independently. We'll coordinate with her. Journalists can sometimes access information that law enforcement can't, and they can publicize patterns that help other victims come forward. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an unofficial federal informant. I continued working at the Aurora office, but now I was documenting everything with FBI guidance. Agent Park had given me specific instructions on what to look for and how to preserve evidence without arousing suspicion. The most damaging evidence came from Morrison himself. He'd grown increasingly careless around me, probably because he saw me as a defeated former CEO who posed no threat. During a staff meeting in late June, he actually bragged about TechFlow's expanded intelligence capabilities and how they were identifying promising acquisition targets with unprecedented accuracy. I recorded the entire meeting on my phone. But the real breakthrough came when I gained access to Morrison's computer system. As the senior developer, I had administrative privileges that the new management team hadn't bothered to revoke. They'd been so focused on controlling the business side of operations that they'd overlooked the technical infrastructure. Late one Friday evening, after everyone else had gone home, I used my access to explore Morrison's file system. What I found exceeded even my worst expectations. Morrison had been using TechFlow's client database to build detailed profiles of every small business in our system. Revenue patterns, cash flow cycles, inventory values, growth trajectories, owner information, family connections. It was a predator's guide to the Denver small business community. But that wasn't all. I found correspondence between Morrison and other members of Castellano's network, discussing specific businesses and their acquisition potential. They had a target list of 43 companies, ranked by profitability and vulnerability. My heart stopped when I saw one of the names on the list, Rodriguez Family Restaurant. Jessica's source, the restaurant owner who'd first contacted her about Morrison's debt collection scam. They weren't just monitoring him. They were planning to hit him again. I copied everything onto multiple encrypted drives and called Agent Park immediately. "We need to meet tonight," I told her. I found their target list. We met at a 24-hour diner in Thornton, far from downtown and far from anyone who might be watching. Agent Park brought another agent, a younger man introduced, only as Agent Torres. I handed them the drives and walked them through what I'd discovered. "This is substantial," Agent Park said after reviewing the files. "More than substantial. This is evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and potentially RICO violations." What's RICO? Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations. Act, Agent Torres explained. It's what we use to prosecute organized crime operations. If we can prove that Castellano's network is systematically defrauding small businesses, we can seize all their assets, including any businesses they've illegally acquired. Including TechFlow. The implication hung in the air between us. "How long before you can move on this?" I asked. "Soon," Agent Park said. "But Maya, I need you to be extremely careful from this point forward. Don't access any more files, don't record any more meetings, don't do anything that might alert them to what you've discovered. What about the other businesses on their target list? We'll handle that, but your job now is to act normal, go to work, and wait for us to make our move." Acting normal turned out to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. For 2 weeks, I sat in that cubicle, watching Morrison walk around the office like he owned the world, knowing that federal agents were building a case that would destroy him. The waiting ended on a Thursday morning in July. I was reviewing code when I heard commotion from the front office. Raised voices, official-sounding demands, the unmistakable sound of people in authority taking control. I walked to the lobby and found Agent Park standing next to Morrison, who was in handcuffs. Behind them, a dozen FBI agents were systematically photographing and collecting evidence from every desk, every computer, every filing cabinet in the office. Morrison saw me watching, and his expression shifted from shock to fury. "You," he said, his voice barely controlled. "You did this." "Mr. Morrison," Agent Park said calmly, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As they led him away, one of the FBI agents approached me. "Ms. Chen, Agent Park asked me to give you this." It was a business card for a federal victim services coordinator, along with a handwritten note from Agent Park. "Your company is now considered evidence in a federal investigation. We'll be in touch about recovery procedures." Recovery procedures. For the first time in 4 months, I allowed myself to hope. The news broke that afternoon. Jessica's article ran simultaneously with the FBI's press conference announcing the arrests of Vincent Castellano, David Morrison, and 12 other members of what they called a sophisticated white-collar crime organization responsible for the fraudulent acquisition of over 30 small businesses. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters wanting comments, former clients asking about their data, Sarah and Marcus calling to make sure I was okay. But the call that mattered most came from Agent Park. "Maya, we need to discuss the business recovery process. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" What does business recovery mean exactly? It means that since TechFlow was acquired through criminal means, it will be returned to its rightful owner pending the completion of our investigation. Returned to me? Returned to you, along with any improvements or developments made since the illegal acquisition. I sat down hard on my couch, suddenly dizzy. And the non-compete clause? Contracts signed under fraudulent pretenses are void, Maya. You're free to operate your business however you see fit. That evening, I called Sarah and Marcus. Within an hour, we were sitting around my kitchen table, planning our return to TechFlow. The Aurora office was still sealed as evidence, but our old warehouse space in Rhino was available. The landlord had held it for us, hoping we'd eventually come back. "So we're really going to do this?" Sarah asked. "Go back to the way things were?" "Not the way things were," I said. "Better. We know what we're capable of now. We know what we can survive." Marcus was grinning. "I've been working on some ideas while I was freelancing, features that could revolutionize our platform. And I've been maintaining contact with most of our old clients," Sarah added. "They're eager to work with us again, especially after what happened with Morrison's management." We talked until midnight, designing the future of TechFlow 2.0. A stronger company, a better company, built on the foundation of everything we'd learned from watching it nearly be destroyed. But as we planned, I kept thinking about Vincent Castellano, sitting in a federal holding cell, probably already planning his legal defense. Men like him didn't stay down easily, and while the FBI had his current operation, they probably hadn't found all his assets or all his connections. The war wasn't over. This was just the end of the first battle. But for the first time since that terrible night in my parents' living room, I felt like I was fighting from a position of strength. They'd tried to steal my company and turn it into a weapon against other entrepreneurs. Instead, they'd given me something far more valuable: knowledge of how their system worked, evidence of their methods, and absolute certainty that I was capable of defeating people who thought they were untouchable. TechFlow was coming back, and this time, we'd be ready for anything. The warehouse space felt different when we walked back in. Empty, dusty, with our old equipment still stacked in boxes where we'd hastily packed everything 4 months earlier. But there was something electric in the air, a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt since before that nightmare began. Sarah ran her hand along our old conference table, still sitting exactly where we'd left it. "It's like walking back into a previous life." Marcus was already examining the network infrastructure we'd built, testing connections and muttering about upgrades. "The bones are good. Better than good. We can have this place operational in 48 hours. I stood in the center of the space, remembering how proud I'd been the day we'd first signed the lease. Young, optimistic, convinced that hard work and good intentions were enough to build something lasting. I wasn't that naive anymore, but I was something better. I was experienced. "Let's get to work," I said. The FBI had been thorough in their seizure of Morrison's operation. When Agent Park called with updates, the scope of the criminal enterprise kept expanding. They'd found evidence of 47 fraudulent business acquisitions across 5 states, involving over $12 million in stolen assets. Morrison Legal Services had been just the tip of the iceberg. But what interested me most was the condition of TechFlow's actual technology. When the federal forensics team finished their analysis, they delivered everything to our warehouse on a Tuesday afternoon. Servers, computers, backup drives, and most importantly, our complete codebase, with all the modifications Morrison's team had made. I spent 3 days going through everything, documenting the changes and figuring out what could be salvaged. What I discovered was both horrifying and oddly gratifying. Morrison's developers had been competent but not creative. They'd successfully implemented the data harvesting features, but they'd done it in the clumsiest way possible. Instead of integrating the surveillance tools elegantly into our existing architecture, they'd bolted them on like aftermarket car parts. The result was bloated, inefficient software that barely functioned. Our original client retention rate had been 96%. Under Morrison's management, it had dropped to 41%. They'd managed to destroy in 4 months what had taken me 3 years to build. "Look at this," I called Sarah and Marcus over to my workstation. They tried to implement real-time financial monitoring, but they did it by adding 17 different tracking scripts that run constantly in the background. Marcus whistled low. No wonder the clients were complaining about performance issues. "It gets worse," I scrolled through more code. "They're storing all the harvested data in unencrypted files on the same servers that handle client transactions. One security breach would expose everything. Sarah shook her head in disgust. These people weren't just criminals. They were incompetent. Criminals. But their incompetence was our opportunity. In trying to weaponize our software, Morrison's team had accidentally created a roadmap of everything TechFlow shouldn't be. Every clunky feature they'd added showed us exactly what our clients valued about the original system. We started rebuilding with a clear mission: create the anti-Morrison version of TechFlow. Where they'd added complexity, we'd add simplicity. Where they'd added surveillance, we'd add privacy protection. Where they'd prioritize data extraction, we'd prioritize user experience. Within 2 weeks, we had a functioning beta version that was cleaner, faster, and more intuitive than anything we'd created before. The enforced break from our own company had given us perspective on what really mattered. But the technical rebuilding was only part of the challenge. We also had to rebuild our client base, our reputation, and our revenue stream. Most of our original clients had canceled their contracts after experiencing Morrison's version of our software. Getting them back would require more than just better technology. I started with personal phone calls. Every client who'd worked with us before Morrison. Every business owner who'd trusted us with their operations. Every person who'd been frustrated by what our company had become under criminal management. The conversation with Janet Peterson, owner of Mountain View Garden Center, was typical of those early calls. "Maya," she said, her voice cautious, "I heard about what happened. The arrests, the FBI investigation. I have to admit, I'm confused about what's real and what isn't." "I understand completely, Janet, and I owe you an explanation." I told her everything. How Morrison had forced the sale of my company through fraudulent debt manipulation. How they'd corrupted our software to spy on clients. How the FBI investigation had revealed the scope of the criminal operation. "So, the terrible software updates, the privacy violations, the performance problems?" Janet said slowly. "That wasn't your doing? Not only was it not my doing, it was specifically designed to do everything I'd spent 3 years trying to avoid." "And you're really back in control now?" "Completely. Sarah and Marcus are back. We're in our original office space. And we've rebuilt the software from the ground up to be better than it ever was." Janet was quiet for a long moment. "Maya, what happened to us shouldn't happen to anyone. That Morrison character nearly destroyed my business with his data mining nonsense. My customers' information got compromised twice. I know, and I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure that never happens again." "I believe you. When can we schedule a demo of the new system?" One by one, our original clients started coming back. Not all of them, not immediately, but enough to give us hope. More importantly, word started spreading about what had really happened to TechFlow. The story of a young entrepreneur whose company was stolen by organized crime, then returned through federal intervention, resonated with the small business community. New clients started calling, business owners who'd heard about our experience and wanted to work with a company that had literally been battle-tested against criminal interference. One of those new clients was Roberto Mendez, who owned 3 auto repair shops in Aurora. He'd heard about our story through Jessica Rodriguez's follow-up articles in the Denver Business Journal. "Ms. Chen," he said during our first meeting, "I'll be honest, I'm not just interested in your software. I'm interested in working with someone who understands what it's like to fight for your business." "How do you mean?" 2 years ago, I almost lost my shops to a debt collection scam. Different company than Morrison, but similar tactics. They claimed my nephew owed them money and tried to force me to use my businesses as collateral. I felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "I got lucky. A lawyer friend helped me fight it, and it turned out the debt wasn't even real. But it cost me $40,000 in legal fees and 6 months of stress that nearly gave me a heart attack." Roberto's story was one of dozens we heard in the following weeks. Morrison's organization had been just one part of a larger ecosystem of predatory businesses targeting entrepreneurs. The FBI investigation had shut down the most sophisticated operation, but smaller scams were still running. That gave me an idea. What if we didn't just rebuild TechFlow as a software company? I suggested to Sarah and Marcus during one of our evening planning sessions. What if we positioned ourselves as a resource for small businesses dealing with fraudulent debt collection? You mean like a consulting service? Sarah asked. More than that. What if we built anti-fraud features directly into our software? Tools that help business owners identify and document suspicious financial pressures? Marcus leaned forward, interested. That's actually brilliant. We could create alerts for unusual debt collection activities, provide templates for documenting harassment, even integrate with legal resources. And we already have credibility in this space because of what we survived, Sarah added. We spent the next month developing what we called the Business Protection Suite, features that helped small business owners monitor for signs of financial manipulation, document suspicious activities, and connect with resources for fighting fraudulent debt collection. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks of announcing the new features, we had 300 new clients, many of whom had heard about TechFlow through word-of-mouth recommendations from other entrepreneurs who dealt with similar threats. But our success also attracted unwanted attention. The first warning came from Agent Park during one of our regular check-ins about the ongoing federal case. Maya, we've received intelligence that associates of Castellanos' organization are monitoring your activities. What kind of monitoring? Nothing illegal, but they're tracking your business registration, your client list, your media appearances. They're not happy about the attention your story has brought to their operations. I felt that familiar chill of fear, but it was different now. Less paralyzing, more motivating. Are you saying they might try something? I'm saying you should. Be careful. Vary your routines, pay attention to your surroundings, report anything unusual. What about Sarah and Marcus? We've briefed them as well. And Maya, there's something else you should know. The federal trial is scheduled to begin in 6 months. You'll be a key witness. The prospect of testifying against Castellanos' organization was both terrifying and satisfying. Terrifying because I'd be publicly standing up to people who'd already proven they were willing to destroy lives for profit. Satisfying because I'd finally have the chance to tell the complete story in front of a judge and jury. But first, we had a business to run. The challenge with rapid growth is maintaining quality while scaling operations. We went from 3 employees to 12 in 2 months, and every new hire had to understand not just our technology, but our mission. We weren't just a software company anymore. We were advocates for small business protection. I instituted weekly training sessions where I told new employees the complete story of what had happened to TechFlow. Not just the technical details, but the emotional reality of watching criminals try to weaponize our work against the very people we'd created it to help. This is why we exist, I'd tell each new hire. Not just to make inventory management easier, but to help honest business owners protect what they've built. The training sessions became legendary within our growing team. Employees would bring friends to listen. Sarah started recording them and posting excerpts on our company blog. The story of TechFlow's criminal hijacking and comeback became part of our brand identity. But the most satisfying part of our growth was the calls we started receiving from other entrepreneurs who'd survived similar attacks. Business owners who'd fought off fraudulent debt collectors, who'd resisted predatory lending schemes, who'd managed to keep their companies despite manufactured financial crises. We started hosting monthly meetups at our warehouse, informal gatherings where small business owners could share experiences and strategies for dealing with financial manipulation. The meetings grew from 6 people to 60 within 3 months. During one of those meetups, I met Amanda Foster, who owned a successful catering company in Colorado Springs. Her story was hauntingly familiar. They targeted my business through my ex-husband's gambling debt. Amanda explained to the group. Different lawyers than Morrison, but the same basic playbook. Sudden demand for payment, threats about family assets, pressure to sell quickly at below market value. "How did you fight it?" asked Roberto, who'd become a regular at the meetings. "I got suspicious when they rushed me. Real debt collectors don't usually give you 48 hours to liquidate your life's work. So I hired my own lawyer and demanded documentation." And? The debt was real, but inflated. My ex-husband owed about $30,000, not the $150 they claimed. And the family asset provision in his loan agreement was legally questionable. "Did you have to pay anything?" $15,000, which hurt but didn't destroy me. The important thing was that I kept my business. Amanda's story reinforced something I'd been learning through our client work. Most of these debt collection schemes relied on speed and intimidation. They worked because they caught people off guard and pressured them into making quick decisions based on incomplete information. That insight led to our next innovation, the Financial Pressure Response Protocol, a step-by-step guide we developed for business owners facing sudden debt collection demands. The protocol included templates for requesting documentation, scripts for communicating with collectors, and a network of lawyers who specialized in defending against fraudulent business debt claims. We made the protocol available for free through our website. Within a month, it had been downloaded over 2,000 times. But our most impactful innovation came from an unexpected source. Tyler. My brother had been conspicuously absent from my life since the FBI arrests. No phone calls, no family dinner appearances, no attempts to explain or apologize. I assumed he was lying low, probably hoping the whole situation would blow over without him facing any serious consequences. I was wrong. Tyler showed up at our warehouse on a Thursday evening in late September, looking thinner and older than I remembered. I was working late, reviewing code, when I heard the front door open. "Maya?" His voice was tentative, uncertain. I looked up from my computer to find him standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter. "Tyler." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "What do you want?" I wanted to talk, to explain, to apologize. I saved my work and turned to face him fully. "Okay, talk." Tyler walked slowly into the space, looking around at our rebuilt operation with something that might have been regret. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said quietly. When I first met Morrison, he presented it as a legitimate investment opportunity. Help connect him with local businesses, earn referral fees, everyone wins. When did you realize it wasn't legitimate? Gradually. First, it was just encouraging business owners to consider debt consolidation loans. Then it was identifying which businesses might be struggling financially. Then it was... He paused, seeming to gather courage. Then it was specifically targeting family-owned businesses where debt pressure could be applied through relatives. Like me. Like you. Tyler sat down heavily in one of our client chairs. "Maya, I swear I didn't know they were planning to take your company until a week before it happened. By then, I was in too deep to back out." "In too deep how?" "I owed them money. Real money, not just gambling debt. Morrison had been paying me for business intelligence, but he structured it as loans against future referrals. When I tried to quit, he explained that I owed over $200,000 in unpaid loan balances." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of deception. What I saw was exhaustion and shame, but also something like relief. "Are you telling me you were being manipulated too?" "I'm telling you I was an idiot who got greedy and ended up trapped in something I didn't understand." Tyler met my eyes for the first time since entering the warehouse. "But I'm also telling you that I have information that might help." "What kind of information?" Tyler pulled out his phone and showed me a recording app. "I've been documenting everything since the FBI raids. Conversations with other people who worked for Morrison, details about businesses that were targeted, names of victims who haven't come forward yet. Why? Because I'm testifying in the federal case. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Tyler's voice was steady now, more confident. And because I owe you more than an apology, I owe you justice. We talked for 2 hours that night. Tyler shared details about Morrison's operation that even the FBI hadn't uncovered. Names of other victims, documentation of the recruitment process for business intelligence gathering, evidence of how the organization identified and cultivated gambling addictions in family members of successful entrepreneurs. The information Tyler provided became crucial to the federal case, but more importantly for me, it helped complete my understanding of how I'd been targeted and manipulated. I hadn't just been unlucky. I hadn't just been the victim of Tyler's poor choices. I'd been specifically selected, carefully studied, and systematically attacked by professionals who made their living destroying people like me. That knowledge was oddly liberating. It meant that what had happened to me wasn't a reflection of my business judgment or family relationships. It was evidence that I'd built something valuable enough to steal. 3 days before the federal trial was scheduled, to begin, Agent Park called with news that changed everything. Maya, Vincent Castellano wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Full confession, complete asset forfeiture, cooperation with ongoing investigations. In exchange, he wants to avoid a public trial. Why? Your story has gotten too much media attention. The business protection features you've developed have made it too difficult for his remaining operations to function. He'd rather cut his losses than face a trial that would expose even more of his methods. I thought about all the small business owners who'd shared their stories at our monthly meetups. All the entrepreneurs who'd downloaded our financial pressure response protocol. All the clients who'd trusted us to help them protect what they'd built. What happens to the victims if he takes a deal? Full restitution. Every business that was fraudulently acquired gets returned or compensated at current market value. And the people who worked for him, like Morrison, they still face trial. Castellano's cooperation doesn't protect his subordinates. 2 weeks later, it was over. Castellano pled guilty to racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $30 million in restitution to his victims. Morrison got 8 years. Tyler got 18 months and 3 years of probation. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences. It was what we'd built from the wreckage of their attack. TechFlow was stronger than ever, with over 800 clients and a team of 25 employees. Our business protection suite had helped dozens of entrepreneurs resist fraudulent debt collection attempts. Our monthly meetups had grown into a formal nonprofit organization dedicated to small business advocacy. Most importantly, we'd proven that criminals who targeted entrepreneurs had made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that business owners would be isolated, desperate, and easy to manipulate. They'd forgotten that entrepreneurs are, by definition, people who build something from nothing. And when you try to destroy what we've built, we don't. Just rebuild it. We make it better. 1 year after Castellano's sentencing, I stood in front of 300 entrepreneurs at the Denver Convention Center, delivering the keynote address for the Colorado Small Business Protection Summit. It was the first event of its kind, bringing together business owners, law enforcement, and advocacy groups to address predatory lending and debt collection fraud. Looking out at that audience, I saw faces I recognized from our monthly warehouse, meetups, clients who'd become friends, survivors who'd become advocates. But I also saw something else. Hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing you're not alone, that there are people who understand your struggles and will fight alongside you. 3 years ago, I began. I thought success meant building a profitable company and keeping it running smoothly. I measured my worth by revenue growth and client satisfaction scores. I believed that if I worked hard enough and smart enough, I could protect what I'd built through pure determination. A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. I was wrong. Not about working hard or being smart, but about thinking I could protect my business in isolation. What I learned, sometimes painfully, is that true protection comes from community, from shared knowledge, and from refusing to let predators operate in darkness. The speech went well, but what mattered most happened afterward. During the networking reception, I was approached by Maria Santos, a young woman who looked like I had 3 years earlier, determined, exhausted, and carrying the weight of enormous responsibility. "Ms. Chen," she said, "I think I might be in trouble." We found a quiet corner where Maria could tell her story. She owned a digital marketing agency that had grown rapidly over 2 years, building a client base of small restaurants and retail shops. Last month, her younger brother had come to her with a crisis. He owed money to people who were threatening to involve the family if he didn't pay. "They want me to use my business as collateral for a consolidation loan," Maria explained. "They say it's the only way to protect my brother and my parents." I felt that familiar chill of recognition. "What's the name of the company offering the loan?" "Summit Financial Solutions." I pulled out my phone and called Agent Park, who was now working with a federal task force dedicated to financial crimes against small businesses. After a brief conversation, I turned back to Maria. "Don't sign anything. Agent Park is going to connect you with resources, and we're going to figure out if this is legitimate debt or another scam." It turned out to be another scam. Summit Financial Solutions was using the same playbook Morrison had used: identify. Successful businesses create leverage through family members, then force asset acquisition through manufactured debt crises. Maria's brother's debt was real but inflated, and the family asset provision was legally questionable. With proper legal representation and FBI support, Maria kept her business, and her brother got help for his gambling addiction. But more importantly, Maria became part of our growing network of entrepreneurs who'd survived predatory attacks and were committed to helping others do the same. That network had become my life's work. TechFlow was still our core business, but it was no longer my only focus. The Small Business Protection Initiative, the nonprofit we'd founded, was now operating in 12 states with over 2,000 member businesses. We offered legal resources, educational workshops, and rapid response support for entrepreneurs facing suspicious debt collection demands. The initiative had prevented 47 fraudulent business acquisitions in its first year of operation, representing over $8 million in protected assets. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real impact was in the transformed relationships between business owners who'd learned to support each other instead of competing in isolation. One of our most successful programs was the Entrepreneur Buddy System, which paired established business owners with newer entrepreneurs who were building their first companies. The mentorship wasn't just about business strategy or financial planning. It was about recognizing and resisting predatory practices that targeted vulnerable entrepreneurs. Sarah had become the program director, using her natural empathy and communication skills to build relationships between mentors and mentees. She'd also become one of my closest friends, the kind of person who could read my mood and know when I needed encouragement or honest feedback. "You know what I love most about what we've built?" she said during one of our weekly planning meetings. "It's not just that we're helping people protect their businesses. We're changing how entrepreneurs think about success." "How do you mean?" 3 years ago, success meant individual achievement, building something bigger and better than your competitors. Now it means building something sustainable that contributes to a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem. She was right. The experience of losing and recovering TechFlow had fundamentally changed how I understood business ownership. I no longer saw other entrepreneurs as competition. I saw them as allies in a shared mission to build honest, ethical businesses that served their communities. That shift in perspective had led to our most ambitious project yet, the Ethical Business Certification Program. Working with the Better Business Bureau and several business schools, we'd developed standards for companies that committed to transparent financial practices, fair treatment of employees and vendors, and active resistance to predatory business practices. Companies that earned the certification displayed a seal that signaled to customers, partners, and investors that they operated according to high ethical standards. More importantly, certified businesses committed to sharing information about suspicious financial pressures and supporting other entrepreneurs who faced similar challenges. TechFlow had been the first company to receive the certification, but we were quickly joined by hundreds of others. The program was creating a community of businesses that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit, that valued ethical relationships over exploitative practices. But perhaps the most personally meaningful development was my relationship with Tyler. My brother had served his 18-month sentence and was now working as a counselor at a residential treatment center for gambling addiction. The work suited him. He understood the psychology of addiction and the way criminal organizations exploited people's vulnerabilities. We met for coffee every few weeks, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been destroyed by manipulation and betrayal. Tyler was different now, more thoughtful and less impulsive. He'd learned to recognize the warning signs of his own addictive behaviors and had developed strategies for managing them. "I've been thinking about something," he said during one of our recent meetings, "about how Morrison's people recruited me." "What about it?" "They didn't just target my gambling problem. They targeted my resentment about your success." I looked up from my coffee, surprised by his honesty. "I was jealous, Maya. You were building something real while I was bouncing between failed ventures and get-rich-quick schemes." When Morrison offered me a chance to be involved in what looked like successful business deals, it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling important. "Tyler, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do, because other people need to understand how these operations work. They don't just exploit financial desperation, they exploit emotional vulnerabilities, jealousy, resentment, shame, the need to prove yourself. That's how they turned me into a weapon against my own family." Tyler had started speaking at our Small Business Protection Initiative workshops, sharing his perspective as someone who'd been recruited by criminal organizations. His presentations were powerful because he could explain the psychology of manipulation from the inside. "The most important thing people need to understand," he'd tell audiences, "is that these criminals are experts at reading people. They know how to identify your weaknesses and turn them against you. The only defense is honest communication with people you trust." His work had become an important part of our educational programming. We'd learned that many predatory schemes succeeded because family members were too ashamed or proud to admit they were in trouble until it was too late. Tyler's story helped people understand that seeking help early was a sign of strength, not weakness. But the transformation I was most proud of was in my own relationship with risk and vulnerability. 3 years ago, I'd believed that success meant having control, that good planning and hard work could protect me from any threat. The experience with Morrison's organization had taught me that control was largely an illusion, that even the most careful entrepreneurs could become targets of sophisticated criminals. That knowledge could have made me paranoid or defensive. Instead, it had made me more connected to other people. I'd learned that true security came not from individual strength, but from collective resilience, from building networks of support that could withstand attacks that would destroy isolated businesses. TechFlow now had over 1,500 clients across 23 states. Our revenue had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first started the company. But more importantly, we'd proven that businesses could be profitable while prioritizing ethical practices and community support. We'd also proven that entrepreneurs who faced criminal attacks could not only survive, but use their experience to create positive change. Every month, I received messages from business owners who'd used our resources to resist predatory schemes, who'd found community through our programs, who'd transformed their own traumatic experiences into advocacy for others. One of those messages came from Amanda Foster, the catering company owner I'd met at our early warehouse meetups. She'd recently launched her own initiative to help women entrepreneurs in Colorado Springs resist financial manipulation. "Maya," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that 3 women have contacted me this month about suspicious debt collection demands involving family members. Using the protocols you developed, we identified 2 fraudulent schemes and helped all 3 women protect their businesses. The ripple effect of what you started is reaching people you'll never meet, in places you'll never visit. Thank you for showing us that survival isn't enough. We can thrive and help others thrive too." Messages. Like that reminded me why the struggle had been worth it. Not just because I'd gotten my company back, but because I'd found a purpose larger than individual success. 6 months ago, I'd been invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about predatory lending practices targeting small businesses. The hearing was part of a broader effort to strengthen federal protections for entrepreneurs and create stronger penalties for organized financial crimes. Sitting in that hearing room, explaining how criminal organizations systematically targeted successful small businesses, I thought about the girl who'd signed those papers in my parents' living room. She'd believed that losing her company was the end of her story. She'd been wrong. It was the beginning. The legislation that emerged from those hearings, the Small Business Protection Act, included provisions I'd specifically recommended: mandatory waiting periods for asset-based debt collection, stronger verification requirements for family asset claims, and federal funding for small business legal defense resources. When the bill was signed into law, I was invited to the ceremony at the White House. Standing in the Rose Garden, watching the president sign legislation that would protect thousands of entrepreneurs from the kind of attack I'd survived, I felt something I'd never experienced before: the satisfaction of turning personal trauma into systemic change. But the moment I treasured most happened later that day, during a quiet dinner with Sarah and Marcus. We were celebrating not just the legislation, but everything we'd built together in the aftermath of nearly losing everything. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said, raising his glass. "If Morrison hadn't stolen TechFlow, we never would have created the Business Protection Suite. We never would have started the Small Business Protection Initiative. We never would have helped all those other entrepreneurs." "Are you saying you're grateful it happened?" Sarah asked. "Not grateful for the trauma," Marcus clarified, "but grateful for what we learned about ourselves and what we were capable of." I thought about that conversation as I finished preparing for tonight's workshop. 23 new small business owners would be joining our Entrepreneur Protection program, learning strategies for recognizing and resisting predatory practices. Among them was a young tech entrepreneur whose story sounded remarkably familiar. Successful startup, family member in financial trouble, suspicious debt collectors offering solutions. History wasn't repeating itself, but it was rhyming. The difference was that this time, the target wasn't alone and wasn't naive. She had resources, community, and knowledge that hadn't existed 3 years ago. That was my real victory. Not getting my company back, though that mattered. Not seeing criminals punished, though that was satisfying. My real victory was building something that would prevent other entrepreneurs from facing what I'd faced. Something that would turn the isolation and vulnerability that predators relied on into connection and collective strength. Looking back, I realized that Morrison and Castellano had made a fatal error in targeting me. They'd assumed that entrepreneurs were inherently selfish, that we'd prioritize individual success over community support. They'd thought that destroying one person's business would intimidate others into compliance. Instead, they'd created an advocate who understood their methods, a survivor who could teach others to resist, and a community that was stronger than any individual business could be alone. TechFlow was thriving. The Small Business Protection Initiative was expanding nationally. The Ethical Business Certification Program was changing how companies thought about their responsibilities to each other. But more than any of that, I'd learned something that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the most meaningful work of your life. They'd tried to steal my company and turn it into a weapon against other entrepreneurs. Instead, they'd given me a mission that was bigger than any business could be, protecting the dreamers, the builders, the people who were brave enough to create something from nothing. And that mission would continue long after TechFlow, long after any individual success or failure, because it was built on a simple truth that no criminal organization could steal or corrupt. Entrepreneurs are stronger together than they ever could be apart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.